Just one. You just have to copy main goal 1. That's it for right now. All right, so let's kind of talk about what happens at the Constitutional Convention. So just to review, our country started with the Articles of Confederation. It went through. It ultimately, though, was a failure. We saw yesterday with Shade's Rebellion. We saw how it was not great. So what they're going to do is they're going to hold a convention. All right, just like you may have a Comic-Con, which is a convention for comics, or Politicon, which is a convention for political figures. They're going to have a convention. So that's going to be a meeting, and at that meeting, they're going to discuss a lot of their ideas for coming up with a new and better constitution. So when they arrive in 1787, they see that the Articles of Confederation is a little bit of a problem. So, you know, they're going to take the Articles of Confederation. This isn't it, obviously, but they're going to take the Articles of Confederation. They're going to look at it, and they're going to say, okay, we have some okay things here, some things that work. We definitely want to keep some of these things. They want to make changes, though. They want to edit and revise the Articles of Confederation. Now, if you've ever written an essay before, and after like the first couple of sentences, you're just probably like, you know what, this isn't good. I just need to start over, sort of thing. All right, so what they're going to do is they're going to look at it and they're going to say, yeah, you know what? Yeah, we're going to get rid of this. So they're going to take the Articles of Confederation, they're going to throw it out. Oh, I actually made it in because I'm awesome. I actually made it in the garbage there, so lucky me. All right, anyway, more importantly, they're going to throw out the Articles of Confederation, and they are going to start new. And so this main goal goes from revising the Articles of Confederation to what you're writing down, which it ended up being was to get rid of the Articles of Confederation. They're going to keep some things from it. They're going to keep some good ideas from it, but ultimately they're going to make a new constitution. They're going to come up with the extremely clever name. They're going to call the new constitution the United States Constitution. All right, so not quite as interesting as the Articles of Confederation. They're both constitutions. Just, you know, one, it's like, you know, coming up with a video game and calling it the United States video game. Right? There's no clever name to it. They just called it the Constitution. All right, so at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to sit down and they're going to write through the Constitution, okay? And our focus for the next 2 weeks will be really centered around that document. And we're going to break down every bit of it in detail so you understand how our government works. Because people that don't understand our government really make a lot of uneducated thoughts. Especially if you start talking about politics, or if you start talking about, you know, our country and our president and our system of government, you don't even understand how the thing works. It's a little bit of a problem. So it's not only important for our class, because it's a big thing on the Regents, it's the United States History and Government test, but it's just an important thing for us to understand how our government works. All right, because so many people are uneducated on it, I would say, but you guys will not be. All right, so number one, the goal was to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, so they're going to restart writing it. And as they're writing it, they're going to talk about a lot of things that you're going to see later on. They're going to talk about the separation of powers, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, the executive branch. They'll talk about checks and balances. They'll talk about federalism. They'll talk about limited government. These are all terms. But they're going to get into a huge problem when they start writing about the legislative branch and they start talking about representation. Because we are now officially a republic, so we need to have representatives. The tricky thing now becomes, how many representatives will each state have? Okay, so they have to really go through this and take their time. You probably saw this from the textbook reading if you did it. Okay, they went into this a little bit, so I really want to clarify and make sure we're going over it. So even though you're not writing the second thing down, it is an important thing. They need to figure out how many people every state would be allowed to have in government. So how many representatives would each state have? And we have a situation where we have 13 states at this time, but within these 13 states, each state has different amount of people. So some states like Virginia will have over 500,000 people, and a state like Rhode Island might only have 50,000 people. Are we going to have the same amount of representatives from each state, or do we want to have a different amount of representatives based on populations? So they come up with the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan. Now, I am not going to say you have to copy down what the New Jersey plan and Virginia plan are, but I think it would really help. All right, so let's go through this situation. If we're going to have representatives in our government, we need to figure out the amount we need to have. Okay, so the first plan that's created is created by the state of Virginia, so they call it the Virginia plan, and it's something that a lot of the larger states in our country would appreciate. So I would recommend writing down the Virginia plan. You don't have to. If you just want to listen, that's fine. But I think it will be really helpful because it will kind of bring everything together when we learn what's called the Great Compromise. Okay, so our country, okay, has our larger states, and our larger states are going to say, you know what, we have more population. I mean, when I mean larger, I don't mean size of the state, I mean the amount of people in the state. Okay, so they propose the bigger your population, okay, the more representation or representatives in government you should have. Okay, so I want to go back for a second. I know if you're copying, you're not done. This is an important detail. There's a do now here, okay, that I want us to go back to because I think it's important. So in the chat, if New York has 30 representatives in government and Rhode Island has only 3, which state has more of a say in decisions of government? You do not need to tell me why. Is it New York, Rhode Island, or are they completely equal? Okay. Excellent. New York has more power. So having representatives means if you have more representatives, that means your state is more powerful. And there's some truth to if you have more people, maybe you should have some more representatives. Okay. So what is a compromise? So a compromise is an agreement that benefits both sides, but there's different levels of a compromise. Okay. One compromise can be something where everyone gets what they want. Okay. So let's say you want to go out to dinner with your friend and you really want to have pizza and your friend really wants to have KFC, okay? A compromise will be, you know what, we both have money, why don't we just go to both? So we both get what we want, all right? And that keeps everyone happy. Compromises could also look a little bit differently. Compromises could also be, you know what, sometimes we need to sacrifice a little bit of what makes us happy so we both kind of get what we want. Okay, so maybe it's you know, a compromise where, you know, your family, your mom or your dad doesn't want you playing video games anymore during the week, and you're like, that's crazy, you know, that's crazy. Like, well, you're not doing your homework, so since you're not doing your homework, you're not allowed to play video games during the week. So a compromise might be, say, look, you know, mom and dad, if I do my homework first and I show you and it's all done, then will you let me play video games? And even though they're not getting fully what they want, okay, where you're no longer playing video games, they are also now getting that you're finally doing your homework, and you're now not fully getting what you want. You can't play video games whenever you want, but you know if you do your homework, you can then play. So that's another form of a compromise. But in a compromise, people are basically getting pretty much what they want, though they may have to sacrifice a little bit. Okay? Yeah, there's a disadvantage and advantage sometimes. You're going to have to lose something. You have to give up something to kind of get what you want. And that's very typical in a compromise. Okay? So the Virginia plan was they proposed the bigger your population, the more representation you have in government. And this was something that a lot of the larger states agree with because the larger states will be more powerful. Okay? The next thing would be now from the smaller states. The smaller states are going to say, wait a second, hold on. We're all states. There's 13 of us. Okay, just because you have more people in your state doesn't necessarily mean your state is more powerful than ours. Okay, you just happen to have more people at this time. We think there should be equal representation in each body of government. So the number they choose is 2. They think each state should have 2 representatives from each particular side. All right? So each state should have the same representation regardless of population. Now, I need to try and put you in the room in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention to show you how delicate this is. You don't want certain states leaving here thinking they are being marginalized or not being taken care of, because what can happen is these states could leave and become independent. It's a very delicate situation that unfortunately a lot of people are worried about. So they're debating in the room. which plan is better. And they're getting very heated in this debate. And my understanding is there's a person by the name of Roger Sherman that kind of stops everyone and says, hold on, we don't need to choose one plan. Why don't we make a compromise and incorporate both plans? So both the larger states and the smaller states kind of realize, like, yeah, that could work. We're both made happy. We'll make a compromise. And compromises are usually good because they prevent situations from escalating and becoming worse. You don't want our founding fathers to not make a new constitution and us have a country where there's no constitution. Okay, so what they come up with is called the Connecticut Compromise, but it's really now known today as the Great Compromise. All right, so this we definitely need to copy down. All right, I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds to a minute so you guys can copy it and not be interrupted, and then I'll explain some of this. So I really want you paying attention to what this is. So Aaliyah, it's definitely just the red part. I encourage the first two parts, but definitely just the red. All right, so let's go through what this means. So the Great Compromise is going to take both the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, and it's going to stop the controversy about just picking one. They're going to say, let's just pick both. And the focus is in our legislative branch. So this is a little bit seventh grade review. Now, we will obviously go into the roles and responsibilities of the legislative branch in our government. But for now, what you need to remember is they're the ones that make the laws. All right. And the way that we kind of go about this is we want our legislative branch to be directly elected by our people, because the laws are going to affect the people. So we want to make sure that the legislative branch has representatives voted by the people of the country. So in 2020, you guys are too young to vote. Not only are you voting for presidents, okay, a president in 2020, you're also voting for people in the House of Representatives from your particular area. All right, this is pretty typical. All right. So the Great Compromise solved the disagreement between the large and small states and was an agreement that put together both the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. And what they did was they created a bicameral, and that word bicameral will come up on the Regents exam. So you need to know that bicameral means two house. Okay, bi means two. Okay, like a binomial. Okay, means two. Okay, and then cameral means house. Cameral means house, so it's two house legislature. Legislature is a real fancy word for the group of people that make laws. And they are going to call them the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate and the House of Representatives still exist today. Hasn't changed. It's still from these two plans. The Senate is going to follow the New Jersey plan. So we are going to have, from every state, no matter the size, the same amount of senators. Each state will have 2 senators. So let's say New York has a population of 10 million people, and Rhode Island has a population of 100,000 people. Let's just say those are the numbers. We will each have 2 senators. Okay? And if there are 2 senators from each state, and there are 50 states, that means there are a total of 100 senators. Okay? If we add a 51st state, maybe like Puerto Rico, then we will have 102 senators. They will get 2 representatives in the Senate as well. So that is the New Jersey plan. All right. The House of Representatives are going to follow the Virginia plan. And it's literally exactly what it says. It's going to be a House made up of representatives from each particular state. So a place like California, I think, has 49 or 50 people in the House of Representatives because their population is so incredibly large. Okay? People in Rhode Island or Montana or North Dakota only have one representative in the House of Representatives. Okay? So you have to understand our particular country, okay? It varies the amount of representatives you have in the House of Representatives, okay? And we go from there. All right, so the Virginia plan comes out in the House of Representatives. The Senate comes out with the New Jersey plan. Sure, legislature, I'll just put in the chat. Legislature is the body of government that makes the laws. So very similar to the legislative branch, but what you'll notice is we have different levels of government if we're going into federalism, right? The legislative branch makes federal laws. The state legislature makes laws for the state. The city legislature makes laws for the city. The school legislature makes rules or laws for the school. Okay, so it varies just depending on where the level you are, but legislature always means laws or the lawmaking body. A really good question. All right, and this is just a kind of side thing, all right, but I think it is important because it comes up later on in this class, like in January, February. Our country has always elected representatives by the people voting in the House of Representatives. Okay, every 2 years, there's a election for the House of Representatives, and they need to win to stay in office. Okay, you can keep getting elected, but you need to be voted every 2 years. Okay, so the people vote for the people in the House of Representatives for their district. So I believe, I'm 99% sure, in the Bronx, where PS 89 is the House of Representatives member, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's up for election every 2 years, and she represents the city of the Bronx and parts of, I think, Brooklyn and Queens. Okay? The Senate is now elected by the people. So now we vote for our senators every 6 years. So our two senators are Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand. Every 6 years, they get voted on. Okay, so this particular election, they're not up for re-election, I don't believe. All right, but they're appointed by the state legislatures until 1913. So the states actually pick their own senators back in history. But that will change in 1913. We'll learn why later on. All right, does anyone need more time finishing copying this down? Okay, so everything's good. Now we're about to write the Constitution. We're gonna have people sign it. Everyone's on board with it. We're at the convention. Everyone's feeling good. And then someone, I don't know who, raises the issue. They go, wait a second. We're gonna count people, and the amount of representatives you have in the House of Representatives is going to change based on your population. And everyone's like, yeah, it's half of the situation. Okay, so they go through this. They go, okay, which one's gonna be more powerful? Right? Are the House of Representatives, because there's more representatives. Right now, there are 435 people in the House of Representatives, okay, and only 100 senators. Are the House of Representatives going to be more powerful? And Roger Sherman goes, no. How about this? Even though there's more representatives in the House of Representatives, there's more people than we have in senators, we're going to keep it like upscale, completely equal, okay? The Senate's not going to be more powerful than the House of Representatives and vice versa. All right, so this is the final part that I guess you just need to understand. I don't need to write it down or draw a little scale. Nothing passes in our federal government's legislative branch. No law is passed. No amendment is passed. No impeachment proceeding is passed unless both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate agree fully. Okay, a great example of this would be earlier this year in January, I think President Trump was impeached. The House of Representatives basically voted to impeach Trump. The Senate then said, no, we're not impeaching him. Okay, they both need to agree for something to happen. If a law needs to be passed and the House of Representatives says, we want to pass this law, and the Senate says no, the law is not passed. They both need to agree for a change to occur. All right, so that seems to solve all the problems. The Great Compromise solves all the issues. So now we're going to write the Constitution, we're going to sign it, and we're all good to go. And then another person in the convention is going to raise another problem. They go, okay, the House of Representatives is based off of population. Yes, it's based off of population. We're making this abundantly clear. What are we going to do about the slaves? Well, the North is going to say, well, the slaves, those are human beings. We're going to count them in the population. Okay? And the South would say, well, hold on, wait a second. They're actually, you don't copy anything here, Luis. They are actually property. They don't actually count in population. All right? So Milagros, you're on the right track, though your fraction is way off. Okay? They're going to come up with something called the 3/5 compromise. This is your last thing. You need to also write down this word here, census. Okay? Write down the word census so you kind of go into it. Now, on Tuesday, when you get back, we'll do a little bit more work with the 3/5 compromise. Our major focus today is on the Great Compromise. But at the convention, they say, you know what? This is a huge problem. And even before you write anything down, can you please take a look at this chart here? This is the first census taken in the year 1790. Every 10 years, 1800, 1810, 1830, 2020, there was a census this year. They're going to count the population. And the reason why they're going to count the population is to see how many people are in a particular district or state. And the more people in a particular state, the more representatives you'll have in the House of Representatives. So a great example would be in 2000, New York had 30 representatives in the House of Representatives. In 2010, we lost some people in this country, in this state from moving away, and we actually dropped from 30 representatives to 29. All right, so that number is always constantly changing. The more people you have, the more representatives you're going to have. All right, so here's a great example. Take a look at Massachusetts in the north. Massachusetts has a total of 378,000 people. Everyone in Massachusetts is free. There's no slaves. They're all free. So their total population is 378,000 people. North Carolina, on the other hand, has 293,000 free people, but 100,000 slaves. So their total population is 393,000. So if you count the slaves as a person, that means North Carolina has more representation in government and is more powerful in government than Massachusetts. If you look at the South as a whole, okay, they go from having less people. They have 1.2 million people that are free, as opposed to the North with 1.9 million. There's not many slaves in the North, so they have a very similar number. But if you count the slaves, you see how equal they are now in terms of population count. So why am I explaining this here? The 3/5 compromise is a compromise designed to try and make sure the northern and southern states are kept happy. Because if you count the slave states, go back to North Carolina, if you don't count the slaves as people in the population count, that means North Carolina is no longer as powerful as Massachusetts, and this has some really grave effects going forward, which I'll explain. All right, so one issue still needed to be resolved, and then we could finally write the Constitution. The representatives from the Constitutional Convention did not know what to do about the slaves in the United States. Okay. Now, we need to speak not as human beings in a second. We need to look at a government body. So I'm going to not really go into the morality of just counting someone as 3/5 of a person. Okay. Here's how it ended up working. They saw that if the South had this argument, the South said, you know what? These are people, okay? They should be counting in the population count because you see them. I know they're a different color skin, but they are definitely counting as people. Now, this is not to say if you're African American. If you're African American and you are free, you're obviously counted in the free population. But obviously, all slaves in the United States were African American descent. So some people get confused that all African Americans back then were counted as 3/5 of a person. That's not the case. It was just the slaves. Okay? So here's what ends up happening. The northern and southern states severely disagreed, because if you fully count all of the slave population, the South then is going to have a lot more representation in government. Okay? And the problem with that may be, ladies and gentlemen, the stronger the South is in the country, the worse it actually may be for the slaves. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as time goes on. So what they decide to do is to keep both the northern and southern states happy is they decided to come up with the system. When they're counting the population, out of every 5 slaves in a state, only 3 would be counted in the census. So if I'm just looking at the last people, if I had me, right, Milagros, Aura, Gentiana, who was the last person that talked? Ruiz. Okay? Let's say us 5 are all free. If all of us are free, doesn't matter the color of our skin, doesn't matter if we're white, if we're black, if we're male or female, doesn't matter. If we're all free at this time, that means we have 5 people in the census. Okay? So the opposite of that would be if me, Milagros, Aura, Gentiana, and Muiz were all slaves, that means 3 people would be counted in the census. That does not mean that me and Milagros will be killed and taken away. It's nothing like that. It's just we will not be literally counted as a full person. Okay? You could also look at it by like everyone's counted as a slave as 3/5 of a person. So it's an extremely horrible thing to do that. Okay? And it is a horrible thing. But in some ways, it was very, very crucial, because I want to explain something. Okay, I'm not sure if you guys can really follow this. If you counted the slaves as a full person at this time, I guarantee slavery lasts longer in this country. And the reason is if the slave states and the southern states have more power in government, they're never going to vote to get rid of slavery probably. Okay, so in some ways, because they had less representation in the South because of the 3/5 compromise, this compromise, as inhumane as it might be, actually was a help in trying to get rid of slavery. And I know that's maybe a little bit tough to follow, but this 3/5 compromise was actually a step forward for slaves. You want to know why? Because before the 3/5 compromise, slaves were not counted as anything. They were counted as property, so they would not have any representation. Okay? Prior to the 3/5 compromise, if me, Milagros, Aura, Gentiana, and Muiz were all slaves, we would get 0 people in the census. All right? So in some ways, it ended up helping our country, even though we're logical in 2020, we could say, well, this is just messed up. How do you not count a person as a full person? But this was the compromise to keep everyone happy in the North and the South. All right? So any other questions off of that? Absolutely, Aura, go ahead.
I'm just confused on something. Like, which was it, the North or the South that wanted slaves to be counted as a person? Which?
Okay, so great question. So here's the tricky thing. The answer is both. And I'm going to go more into this Monday, but essentially, 2 things you need to understand. The more people you have in your state and representation, the more population, the more representatives you have in the House of Representatives. That's a good thing. The also truth is, the more people that live in your state, like let's say New York, a lot of people live in New York, a lot of people live in California, the taxes of the state are higher. So the more people that live in your state, the higher the taxes are. So when I mean both the North and the South didn't want to have slaves fully counting as a person, because that means their taxes would go up if they had more slaves, but so would their representatives. So it's like kind of both. So ultimately, I'm going to say, to make it as simple as possible, the South wanted to have more representation So they wanted to have the slaves count as a full person in terms of representation. Now, they're not going to treat them as full people. They're not going to treat them as equal people. But in terms of the population census, they want it to be it. So ultimately, to fully answer your question, Aura, it's both. But if I had to lean one way, it's definitely the South. It's a nice question. All right? Absolutely, Milagros. They're using their slaves, okay, for their benefit in more ways than just one. Okay? So with that being said, it's 10:52. We're going to go back to the Great Compromise. We're going to focus in on a reading that you're going to do on your own. Okay, so I'm sharing I'm sharing the Google Classroom. All right, you pretty much will get it at this point. You have a reading, as you see it pop up here. You have a reading that says The Great Compromise. It's going to kind of go into some of the details, but go a little bit further into detail about it. And then you have to answer these 3 short answer questions, and then these 3 Regents questions. You're not going to answer them on the PDF. I nicely just set up a little template on the Google Doc. Okay? The template gives you the 3 short answers to answer right there, and then you could do the short multiple choice here. It is 10:53. At 11:06, I would at least like to go over the last 3 questions to see how you did. Okay, the Regents questions. So try and get it done. I don't need a full close read. Just kind of skim through it. Any questions while I'm taking attendance? Just write them in the chat. Let me know. All right. Okay, guys and girls, start to finish up your last questions here. I want to just show you a couple things. I posted your second textbook Thursday assignment today, so you have 6 days to do it. If you're looking here, this will be due Thursday. Where else did I put it? I put in the classwork, so you just go to Textbook Thursday. You click on Thursday, week 2. I may able to put the dates of the week going forward. Maybe I'll just start doing that now. Week 2, which will be, let's see what the date is next week. So let's say what, 10/12 to 10/6, 10/15 or whatever it is. 10/16. All right, so you could do it during that week. All right. In terms of this particular assignment, let's just quickly go over the questions. Okay, so blast it in the chat right now what you got for the first question here. The Great Compromise at the Constitutional Convention was important because it what? I see some 4s. I see some correct students. Very nice. Okay, 4 is the correct answer. They try and trick you with 3. Create a single house national legislature. Remember, the Senate and the House are 2 separate houses. Okay, so bicameral. Okay, you just need to put 4 once, Josh Torres. You just got to put once. Okay, it's not funny. It's not cool. Just an annoyance. Number 2, the Great Compromise reached at the Constitutional Convention, settled dispute over how to what? 2, 2, 2. You guys sound like ballerinas. 2, 2 is good. All right. The states would be represented in Congress. That is good. And then the last one, number 3, if you got number 2, it's pretty easy. Number 3 is what? Okay, 1. Oh, I got a sir. I like that. 1 sir. That sounds good to me. Okay, so you guys seem like you're in pretty good shape with this. The Great Compromise is a major topic on the Regents exam. The Constitutional Convention is a pretty big topic as well. I'll probably throw one up on the Instagram a little bit later. Make sure all your answers are complete. I'll let you guys go a little bit early today. Please keep in mind Columbus Day is Monday, so you'll be off from school. I will see you guys Tuesday. We'll go a little bit more into the 3/5 compromise, and then we will get into actually ratifying the Constitution. So enjoy the 3-day weekend. We don't have one for another 4 or 5 weeks, so definitely enjoy it. Enjoy the day off, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Bye-bye.